The morning Clara Bennett found the man by the creek, she wasn't looking for a secret that would ruin her life. She was looking for a horse. Her father's prized mare vanished from the paddock before sunrise, and if she didn't find it, the silence in their house would curdle into something mean. But what she found wasn't a horse. It was a man, lying face down in the thick, red mud, a dark stain spreading across the back of his torn shirt like a terrible bloom. He was Lakota. And in 1878, Montana, finding a Lakota warrior on your land, wounded and alone, meant only one thing: trouble. The kind of trouble that ends with rifles and shallow graves. She should have run, should have dug her heels into her stallion's flanks and galloped back to the ranch, back to her father, Samuel, a man whose heart had hardened right alongside his calloused hands. He would have come back with a loaded Winchester, not a question on his lips. He wouldn't have seen a man. He would have seen a problem to be removed. But she didn't run. Something held her there, a strange stillness in the morning air. Maybe it was the way his fingers, even in unconsciousness, were curled tight around a small beaded pouch, as if it was his last link to a world that was being burned away. So she knelt, her worn leather skirt soaked in the muddy water. And in that one moment, kneeling beside a dying man who should have been her enemy, Clara Bennett sealed her fate. She was 23, unmarried by a stubborn choice that grated on her father every single day. He wanted her paired off, settled, another pair of hands to help tame a territory that refused to be tamed. He saw ranchers and their sons as solutions. Clara saw them as cages with prettier curtains. She had her mother's quiet defiance, a fire banked low but burning hot, and a secret dream of a life that was more than just the endless Montana sky and the smell of cattle. The man at her feet was close to her age. His face, half turned in the mud, had cheekbones as sharp as flint arrows. A bullet wound gaped in his side, ugly and deep. Cavalry work, she guessed. They'd been sweeping the territory for weeks, clearing the last pockets of resistance. She was risking everything: her safety, her reputation, her father's wrath, which was a terrible thing to behold. But looking at the steady, shallow rise and fall of his back, she knew she couldn't leave him. It wouldn't be caution. It would be murder. With strength she didn't know she possessed, she heaved him over her horse's saddle, his dead weight a groaning burden. She didn't lead him back to the main house. Her father had an old line shack, 2 miles north, long forgotten and swallowed by the prairie, a place of ghosts and memories where no one ever went. For 3 days it became a sanctuary. For 3 days she lived a lie. She stole whiskey from her father's study to clean the wound, the burn of it making the man hiss in his fevered sleep. She cooked broth in the main house kitchen, telling the stony-faced housekeeper it was for a sick calf. She tore strips from her own petticoats for bandages. At night she'd ride out under the cover of 1,000 stars, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. She sat by his side as fever racked his body, listening to him murmur in a language that was like rushing water, words she couldn't understand, but felt in her soul. On the second night, her father was in a foul mood. "Still no sign of that mare," he grumbled, slamming his plate on the table. "And the cavalry passed through. Said they chased a small band of Sioux north of here. Ran 'em to ground, but one got away. Wounded, they think." Clara's blood ran cold. She kept her eyes on her food, her hand trembling so badly she had to set her fork down. "They're animals," her father continued, his voice thick with a hatred she'd never understood. "Vicious. Remember what they did to your uncle's homestead?" It was his favorite story, his justification. But Clara only felt a hollow sickness in her stomach. She was hiding one of those animals in their own backyard. On the third night, she was changing his bandage when his eyes flew open. They weren't hazy with fever anymore. They were dark, sharp, and utterly aware. And they were fixed on her. "Why?" he asked. His voice was a raw rasp, but the single word was perfect English. It hung in the dusty air of the shack, a question that demanded more than a simple answer. Clara's hands stilled, her heart leaping into her throat. "Because leaving you would have been the same as pulling the trigger myself," she said, her voice barely a whisper. He studied her then, his gaze so intense it felt like he was seeing past her sun-weathered skin and into the deepest parts of her. He saw the loneliness she hid so well. He saw the cage she felt closing in around her. I am Takakota, he said finally, his voice gaining a little strength. It means friend to everyone, a name your people would find amusing. A small, sad smile touched Clara's lips. Your secret is safe with me, Takakota. And so they talked. As he healed, their words filled the tiny shack, weaving a world between them that shut out the harsh reality waiting outside. He spoke of the Black Hills, the Paha Sapa, the sacred heart of his people, now overrun with gold-hungry miners. He told her of the broken treaties, promises written on paper that dissolved like smoke. He spoke of children stolen from their families and sent to schools in the East, their hair cut, their names changed, their language forbidden. A quiet rage burned in his eyes, but his voice was filled with a profound sorrow that ached in Clara's own chest. She, in turn, told him things she'd never spoken aloud to anyone. She told him about her mother who had faded away from consumption 5 years earlier, leaving a hole in their lives that her father had filled with bitterness. She told him of her fear of becoming one of the other ranch wives, women whose dreams had dried up like tumbleweeds, their days measured only in meals cooked and clothes mended. Takakota listened. He didn't just hear the words. He heard the music beneath them, the melody of her soul. Among my people, he said one evening, his voice soft in the lamplight, a woman is walking, sacred. She is the giver of life, the keeper of wisdom. Her spirit is not a thing to be made small. For the first time in her life, Clara felt truly seen. She wasn't just Samuel Bennett's daughter, a potential wife for a local rancher. She was Clara, and it was enough. The danger, however, was closing in. Her father's suspicion was growing. You spend a lot of time riding north these days, he said one morning. His eyes narrowed over his coffee cup. Looking for that mare still? The air is clearer there, she lied, her heart pounding. The lie tasted like ash in her mouth. Then a ranch hand, a nosy man named Jeb, claimed he'd seen smoke rising from the direction of the old line shack. Probably just drifters, her father grunted. I'll ride out there tomorrow with a rifle and see. Panic seized Clara with icy claws. Tomorrow. He had to be gone by tomorrow. That night, she told Takakota, his fever had broken and his strength was slowly returning, but he was far from healed. I must leave tonight, he said, his face grim. The air in the shack grew heavy with unspoken words, with the crushing weight of their impossible reality. As she rebandaged his wound one last time, her fingers brushing against his warm skin, he caught her hand. His grip was gentle but firm. You saved my life, Clara, he said, his dark eyes searching hers. In my culture, that creates a bond, a debt that can never be broken. Tears pricked her eyes, hot and sudden. Then I suppose we're bonded, she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. The space between them crackled, charged with everything they were and everything they could never be. He leaned in, and his kiss was a question, soft and hesitant. She answered by leaning back into him, her hands moving from his chest to tangle in his long dark hair. It wasn't a kiss of passion, not yet. It was a kiss of recognition, of two lonely souls finding a brief, impossible harbor in a storm. They held each other through the long, dark hours, as if their combined will could stop the sun from rising. But the dawn came anyway, painting the sky in cruel, beautiful shades of pink and gray. He dressed in the mended clothes, his movements still careful, his face a mask of sorrow. I will not forget you, he said, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw with a tenderness that nearly broke her. Nor I, she replied, her voice a shattered whisper. They both knew the promise was a ghost, a beautiful lie in the face of an impossible future. She watched from the doorway of the shack as he melted into the pre-dawn shadows, moving with the silent, fluid grace of a man who was part of the land itself. He didn't look back. Maybe it would have hurt too much. Clara returned to the main house, a phantom in her own life. She felt hollowed out, as if the most vital part of her had walked away into the darkness. She tried to resume her old life, to be the person she was before, but it was impossible. She now carried a secret that could burn her entire world to the ground. The months that followed were a special kind of hell. Her father, sensing her distraction and mistaking it for melancholy, redoubled his efforts to marry her off. His chosen candidate was Tom Morrison, the son of their wealthiest neighbor. Tom was a good man, everyone said so. He had steady hands, a solid reputation, and a way of looking at Clara that was possessive, as if she were a prize mare he was about to acquire. When Clara looked at him, she felt a suffocating emptiness. All she could see were the dark eyes that had seen into her soul. All she could feel were the gentle fingers that had traced her face in the soft lamplight of a forgotten shack. Then came the sickness. At first, she dismissed it as a lingering chill, but when the nausea greeted her every morning and her monthly bleeding failed to arrive for a second time, a cold, terrifying certainty took root in her heart. Panic, sharp and brutal, clawed at her. An unwed mother was a scandal that could ruin a family, but a white woman carrying a Lakota's child? That was an unforgivable sin. She would be an outcast. Her child would be a pariah, belonging to neither world and hated by both. She made her choice with the same grim determination that had led her to the creek that first morning. She would protect this child no matter the cost. And the cost was her life, her freedom, her truth. That evening when Tom Morrison came to call, she smiled. She let him hold her hand. And when he, emboldened by her sudden change, asked for her hand in marriage for the 10th time, she said yes. The look of triumph on his face made her stomach churn. Her father beamed, slapping Tom on the back, already counting the acres that would one day merge their two ranches into an empire. They were married within a month, a small, hasty ceremony that felt more like a funeral to Clara. On their wedding night, she steeled herself, closing her eyes and thinking of a man disappearing into the dawn. She did what was required of her, feeling like a ghost inhabiting someone else's body. 6 weeks later, she told Tom she was pregnant. He was overjoyed, never for a moment questioning the timing. He was too blinded by his good fortune, by the beautiful wife and the heir that would solidify his legacy. He never saw the lie in her eyes. The baby came in the dead of winter, a boy with a full head of dark hair. When he opened his eyes for the first time, Clara gasped. They were her own, a piercing, impossible blue, a miracle, a perfect disguise. The combination of dark hair and blue eyes raised no suspicions in a community of mixed European heritage. She named him William. But in the quiet of her own heart, she called him Chayton, a name Lakota had taught her. It meant falcon. For 5 years, Clara lived this fractured life. On the surface, she was the perfect wife and mother. She was a good wife to Tom, who proved to be a decent, if unimaginative, husband. He was proud of her, proud of his son. He provided for them, protected them, but he never truly knew her. She raised William with a fierce, protective love that was almost painful in its intensity. She taught him to be gentle with animals, to see the world with wide, curious eyes. But at night, after Tom and the boy were asleep, she would stand by the window, staring out at the dark, looming shapes of the mountains. She wondered if Takakota was still alive. The Indian wars were escalating, and the news that reached them was filled with stories of battles, massacres, and forced marches. Each report was a knife twisting in her gut, a fear she could never show. Tom would read the newspaper aloud, talking about the savages being pushed back, about the final victory for civilization. And Clara would nod, a silent scream trapped behind her teeth, hating herself for her cowardice, and hating the world that made such cowardice a requirement for survival. Then on a hot afternoon in late summer, everything changed. Clara was hanging laundry, the clean, wet sheets smelling of lye soap and sunshine. 5-year-old William was playing at her feet, chasing grasshoppers in the tall grass. That's when she saw them, a dark line on the distant horizon. At first, she thought it was a cavalry unit, the biggest she had ever seen. But as they drew closer, a cold dread washed over her, so powerful it made her drop a wet sheet into the dust. These weren't soldiers, they were warriors. Lakota warriors. Hundreds of them, riding in perfect, disciplined formation, their painted ponies moving like a single, flowing river across the land that was supposed to be settled and safe. A war party. Tom was in town on business. Most of the ranch hands were with him. Only a few old-timers were left, and they scrambled for the bunkhouse, barring the door, their faces pale with terror. But Clara stood frozen, her feet rooted to the spot, her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic, wild bird trapped in a cage. William, sensing her fear, clung to her skirts, his small body trembling. The warriors didn't charge. They stopped just outside the ranch's main fence line, a silent, imposing wall of muscle and menace. Their horses stamped and snorted, kicking up a cloud of dust that turned the afternoon sun a blood orange. Then one rider separated from the group. He moved with a familiar, fluid grace that made Clara's breath catch in her throat. He dismounted, and as the dust settled, she saw his face. It was Takakota. He was older, thinner. There were new lines etched around his eyes and a jagged scar cut across his jaw that hadn't been there before. But the eyes were the same, intense, piercing. They swept over the ranch, over her, and then they found William, his gaze locked on the small boy pressed against her skirts. And in that instant, Clara saw a flicker of something in his expression. Shock, recognition, a dawning, painful understanding that made her knees go weak. He started walking toward them, slow and deliberate, his hands held open at his sides to show he was unarmed. He stopped just on the other side of the fence, the wooden rails the only thing separating their two worlds. Clara, he said. Her name in his mouth after 5 long years was a physical blow, almost more than she could bear. "Why are you here?" she managed to ask, her voice a choked whisper, though a part of her, the part that had never stopped waiting, already knew. His eyes moved from her face to William's and back again. The boy had his mother's blue eyes, but the shape of his face, the set of his jaw, the dark fall of his hair, it was all Takakota. The truth was written there for anyone to see. "The wars are ending," Takakota said, his voice quiet, meant only for her. "My people are being forced onto the reservations, far from here, but I could not go, without seeing you one last time, without knowing." He didn't need to finish the sentence. His gaze on William said the rest. Tears she hadn't even realized were forming began to slide down Clara's cheeks. "He's safe," she whispered, her words tumbling out in a rush. "He's loved. My husband, Tom, he doesn't know. No one knows." Takakota nodded slowly, a universe of pain and understanding in his eyes. "I brought my warriors because I had to be sure I could leave safely," he said. "I hoped, but I see now. You have a life here, a family." The weight of everything left unsaid, of 5 years of silence and secrets, pressed down on them, thick and suffocating. Just then, a new cloud of dust appeared on the road from town. A posse, and at its head, riding hard, was her husband, Tom. Tom and a dozen angry, armed ranchers, riding straight toward a silent army of 500 Lakota warriors. The world held its breath. Tom Morrison reined in his horse so hard it reared back, its eyes wild. He saw his wife and son standing outside the fence, and beyond them, a sea of Lakota warriors. His face, already red from the ride, turned a shade of purple. "Clara, get in the house! Get the boy!" he roared, pulling his rifle from its scabbard. The ranchers behind him followed suit, the metallic clicks of hammers being cocked sounding unnaturally loud in the sudden, tense silence. Takakota didn't even turn. His eyes remained locked on Clara, but a subtle shift in his posture, a hardening of his jaw, showed he was aware of the new threat. A low murmur went through his warriors. They straightened in their saddles, hands moving to the weapons at their sides. This was it, the spark that would ignite the prairie. Clara's mind raced. This was her fault. Her secret had brought these two worlds to a violent collision course right here, in her front yard. She looked at Tom, his face contorted with fear and rage. She looked at Takakota, his expression unreadable but radiating a dangerous calm. And she looked at William, her son, caught between them. She had to stop it. "Tom, no!" she shouted, her voice ringing with an authority he had never heard before. "They mean no harm. They're just passing through." "Passing through?" Tom laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "This is a war party, Clara. Are you blind?" He spurred his horse forward, stopping at the fence line, his rifle aimed squarely at Takakota's chest. "You're on my land, savage. State your business, or we'll state it for you." Takakota finally turned his head slowly, his gaze dismissing Tom as if he were nothing more than an angry insect. His eyes met Clara's again. "I need to know something," he said, his voice so low it was almost lost in the wind. but she heard every word. That night, was it real? Or was I just another wounded creature you felt pity for? The question struck her with the force of a physical blow. In the midst of this standoff, with rifles aimed and lives hanging in the balance, that was what mattered to him, to them. She looked at this man who had haunted her dreams, the father of her child, the keeper of her heart's greatest secret. It was the most real thing in my life, she said, her voice clear and strong, not caring that Tom was listening, not caring that tears were now flowing freely down her face. It still is. Takakota closed his eyes for a brief second, as if her words were both a balm and a blade. When he opened them, a final, heartbreaking decision was in them. He looked past her, at the boy who should have been his. Then he looked back at her. "Come with me," he said, the words a sudden, impossible plea. "You and the boy. My people will accept you. We will protect you. You would be free." The offer hung in the air, a shimmering, beautiful, impossible dream. Free, to stop lying, to live in the truth, to be with him. She saw a flash of a different life, a life of hardship, of poverty, of being an outsider among his people, but a life that was honest, a life where her son would know his father. She looked at William, his small face pale with confusion and fear. She thought of the world he would be entering, a world of reservations and rations, a dying world. Here he had a future, stability, education, a chance. Then she looked at Tom. He was a proud man, a simple man in his way. He loved William. He had been a good father to him. He didn't deserve this betrayal. The warriors sat on their horses, silent statues, waiting for their leader's command. The ranchers gripped their rifles, waiting for the first shot. "I can't," she said, and the words were shards of glass in her throat. "I can't." She saw the light in Takakota's eyes dim, but he nodded, as if he had expected it, as if he understood her choice better than she did herself. He reached into the beaded pouch at his belt, the same one he had been clutching when she found him in the creek, and pulled out a small carved object. It was a wooden horse, no bigger than a child's palm, intricately detailed with beads and a single falcon feather tied to its mane. He held it out to her over the fence. "For the boy," he said, "so he will always know he comes from a nation of warriors, even if he never knows the full truth." Clara took it, her trembling fingers brushing his for a fleeting, electric moment. Tom watched the exchange, his face a mask of confusion. He lowered his rifle slightly, misinterpreting the gift as some kind of tribute or peace offering. "Will you be safe?" she asked, her voice breaking. Takakota's smile was sad and tired. "We go to the Standing Rock Agency. It is not the life we knew, but we will endure. We always have." He turned to go, then paused one last time. "If things should ever change, Clara, if this world becomes too much for you, send word to Standing Rock. Ask for Takakota. I will come for you." He didn't wait for an answer. He swung onto his horse in one smooth, powerful motion, raised his hand in a silent signal to his men, and turned his horse's head toward the mountains. The river of warriors flowed away, silent as they had come, melting back into the landscape, leaving only dust and the heavy silence of what might have been. Clara stood clutching the small wooden horse, William's hand held tight in hers until they were completely gone. That evening, Tom was full of swagger and relief. He saw the event as a victory. He had faced down a war party and they had backed off. He didn't understand the gift, but he saw it as a sign of respect for his show of force. He never once questioned why the warriors had stopped at his ranch or why their leader had spoken his wife's name. His world was too small for a truth that large. Clara listened to him, her secret now buried deeper than ever. But somehow it felt lighter. The truth had been acknowledged. She was no longer entirely alone with it. Years passed. Life on the ranch fell into a rhythm of seasons and hard work. William grew into a tall, thoughtful young man. He was a good student, quiet and observant, with a preternatural gift for handling horses that none of Tom's family could explain. He loved the small wooden horse, keeping it on his bedside table, though he never knew its true origin. Tom was a good father, patient and kind, if sometimes puzzled by his son's introspective nature. There were moments that terrified Clara. Once, when William was 10, he saw a drawing of a Lakota warrior in a book and said, "He looks like the man in my dreams." Clara's heart had nearly stopped. She learned to live with the duality, to love Tom in her own quiet, grateful way, while keeping a part of her heart locked away in that crumbling line shack, forever bound to a wounded warrior. News from the reservations was sporadic and grim. She heard of the ghost dance, of the Army's fear, of the crackdown at Wounded Knee. Each piece of news was a fresh wound, a fresh terror for a man she hadn't seen in over a decade. But she endured, just as he had promised his people would. The letter arrived in the spring of 1890, 12 years after the standoff at the fence. It was addressed to her in a neat, cursive hand she didn't recognize, postmarked from the Dakota Territory. Her hands shook as she opened it. The note inside was brief. "Takakota is dying. Tuberculosis. He asked for you." The world tilted on its axis. Tom was in Cheyenne for a cattlemen's convention, not due back for a week. William, now 17 and preparing to leave for college back east, was out riding with friends. The choice was instant. There was no debate. She told the housekeeper she'd received a telegram about a sick cousin in Billings, packed a small bag with a few essentials, and caught the first train north. The Standing Rock Reservation was a place of profound and desolate sadness. The proud, vibrant people she remembered from Takakota's stories were gone. In their place were people confined to dusty, barren land, their buckskin and beads replaced with ill-fitting government-issue clothing. She saw the hollow eyes of despair, the listlessness of a people whose world had been stolen. She found Takakota in a small, dark cabin. The disease had ravaged his once powerful body, leaving him frail and thin, a shadow of the man he was. But when he saw her enter, his eyes lit up with the same fire she remembered. "You came," he whispered, his voice a dry rustle. "You called," she answered simply, sitting on the edge of his cot and taking his thin, hot hand in hers. They talked for a day and a night, the 12 years of silence falling away as if they had never been. He told her of the reservation, of the quiet struggle to keep their traditions alive in secret, of friends lost to disease and despair. And she told him about William, about his blue eyes and his kind heart, about his gift with horses, about the way he would sometimes stand on a ridge, staring at the horizon as if listening for something only he could hear. "He has the spirit of both worlds," Takakota said, a faint smile on his lips. "He will need that strength for the times to come." As the dawn approached, his breathing became more labored. He tightened his grip on her hand. "I must tell you something," he rasped, his eyes locking on hers. "The day you found me, I was fleeing a battle. We were ambushed by the cavalry. I killed soldiers that day, Clara. Men with families, maybe not so different from your Tom. I need you to know the whole truth, to know who you saved." Clara looked at the dying man before her, the man who had caused her a lifetime of heartache and given her a lifetime of love. "I know who you are," she said, her voice steady and sure. "You are a man who fought to protect his people. You are a father who never got to know his son. You are the only person in this world who ever saw the real me. That is the only truth that matters." A single tear traced a path through the dust on his cheek. He smiled then, a real smile, and for a moment, the years and the sickness fell away from his face. "In another world, Clara," he began. She put a gentle finger to his lips. "In this world, Takakota," she said firmly, "we loved each other. That has to be enough." He died as the first rays of the sun streamed through the cabin's single dirty window, his hand in hers. Clara felt his spirit leave, and it felt as if the world itself had grown smaller, emptier. She stayed for the burial, a silent white woman standing among the grieving Lakota women. They accepted her presence without question, as if they understood that grief has no color, no tribe. When she returned to the ranch 2 days later, exhausted and hollowed out, she found William waiting for her in the parlor. He wasn't supposed to be there. He was supposed to be in town, and in his hand, he was holding the small, carved wooden horse. "I know," he said simply. There was no anger in his voice, only a quiet, sad certainty. "I've always known." Something was missing. The horse, the way you would look at me sometimes, when you thought I wasn't paying attention. I saw him, you know. That day, I was only 5, but I remember his eyes. Clara's carefully constructed world shattered into a million pieces. Tom, she whispered, horrified. William shook his head. He doesn't know. He never will. It's not my place to break his heart, but I needed you to know that I know. I'm tired of the silence between us. They stood there for a long moment, mother and son, the secret finally out in the open between them, vast and life-altering. Was he a good man? William asked finally, his blue eyes searching hers. My father. Clara thought of his gentleness, his fierce pride, the impossible choice he had made to leave them for their own safety. He was the best man I ever knew, she said, and the truth of it resonated in the quiet room. In the years that followed, the truth changed everything. William didn't go to college in the East. He went to medical school and became a doctor. He dedicated his life to working on the reservations, a man of two worlds building bridges between them. Tom Morrison passed away peacefully in his sleep a few years later, never knowing the truth. And Clara mourned him, genuinely grateful for the life he had given her, for the shelter of his unknowing kindness. She lived to be a very old woman. The ranch prospered under William's care when he was home. She kept the carved wooden horse on her mantle, and sometimes on a spring morning, exactly like the one when she had found a wounded man by the creek, she could almost feel his presence, a warm wind blowing down from the mountains. She wrote everything down in a series of journals, leaving the truth for her grandchildren so they would always know the full story of where they came from a convergence of two worlds, from a love that society had forbidden. She wrote that courage sometimes looks like staying, and sometimes it looks like letting go. When she died at the age of 83, William found a small, beaded pouch clutched in her hand. It was the pouch Lakota had been holding all those years ago, the one she'd never shown to a single soul. Inside, he found a lock of his own dark baby hair, a single blue bead from his mother's necklace, and a small, folded piece of hide with Lakota words written on it. He took it to one of the elders on the reservation, who translated the simple, powerful message. Until the mountains fall into the sea. He buried the pouch with her, and as he stood over her grave, he finally understood. Some loves are too big for one lifetime. They spill over, waiting patiently, certain as the sunrise to be reunited where no fences can keep them apart. If this story of a love that defied all boundaries touched your heart, hit that subscribe button and join us for more tales you won't forget.